technologies, new discoveries, new political, social, and economical realities. But throughout all of these changes, the one thing that does not change is our responsibility as human beings to each other. The embody of the best values that will carry the human race forward. And we cannot do this as a civilization without the freedom to speak, to challenge, and to question. It is the role that all humans have, but it is a responsibility that we as journalists and media have a special obligation to carry. It is our stated mission and role as those who are entrusted with uncovering the truth, going wherever it leads, and as agents of change. We are here to serve humanity, to ask the hard questions that will push us forward, to challenge superficial thinking, and to investigate the abuses of power against humanity. Our profession has changed from Seymour Hersh's expose of the massacre at My Lai that reshaped a nation's war, to Bernstein and Woodward's taking down of corrupt president. History is full of examples. We have the power to influence, and we have the power to change history together to make this a better world. So it is with deep concern that we are witnessing the global repression of free speech, the censoring of opinions, and the closure of independent media institutions. From the recent attack against CNN to the demands by Arab governments to close Al-Jazeera media network, it is a dangerous pattern that is emerging. For Al-Jazeera, we have seen this before. Al-Jazeera courageous journalists have been imprisoned, tortured, and killed serving our noble profession, simply to bring human stories to the attention of the world. This climate of fear-mongering and repression by governments is only making things worse. It is only our profession that is at stake. It is the lives of those journalists and reporters practicing, such as yours, their profession. Media, news, and journalists are not pawns to be bullied in a political game. These are many false allegations that are made against us in this age, that we are owned by a government, by special interest, by an agenda. But the reality is that we are owned by the people, and Al-Jazeera is the channel of the peoples of the world. We are the voice of the voiceless, their dreams, their frustrations, and their opinions, and their questions. There are voices that oppressive governments would like to see silenced. We cannot allow a truth to be the casualty in the current dangerous climate as governments collude to shut down free speech. Together, we are stronger, and we look forward to work with you all in solidarity to protect our profession. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Najjar. Et maintenant, je me tourne vers vous, Monsieur Demirtas. Je crois que vous allez nous parler en français. Et ensuite, je donnerai la parole.
Voilà, tout à fait. En tant qu'organisme des droits de l'homme, Alliance internationale des droits de l'homme et du développement et Centre de Genève pour la démocratie, nous condamnons déjà ce qui se passe envers le Qatar et Al-Jazeera. Et j'aimerais tout d'abord rappeler, avant de laisser la parole à notre confrère, monsieur d'Al-Jazeera, rappeler que l'Arabie Saoudite, suivie par l'Égypte, les Émirats Arabes Unis et 4 autres pays ont décrété un embargo sur l'État du Qatar, en violation du droit international, au courant du mois du Ramadan 2017. La raison déclarée était un prétendu soutien au terrorisme, sans apporter la moindre preuve. Cet embargo a provoqué une nouvelle crise au Proche-Orient, une fois de plus divisé des pays de la région. Des violations graves des droits de l'homme ont été constatées. Aussi, un petit retour en arrière, en 2013, le coup d'État militaire sanglant du président égyptien démocratiquement élu et la couverture médiatique par la chaîne de télévision Al-Jazeera, des manifestations pacifiques ainsi que la politique étrangère indépendante et la ligne éditoriale indépendante d'Al-Jazeera ont été à l'origine de la première rupture diplomatique entre les pays menant l'embargo contre ce petit émirat. Je peux citer comme exemple la directrice déléguée de la fondation de l'agence France Presse, Madame Randa Habib, qui, à cette époque, déclarait « En Égypte, Al-Jazeera a diffusé en direct les manifestations de la place Tahrir. C'était le média qui était là, sur place, pour relayer ce qu'il se passait et qui jouait le rôle de mégaphone. Pendant tout le printemps arabe, cette télévision a eu un impact démultiplicateur extraordinaire, mais ça a aussi été le catalyseur de ces révolutions. Personne n'a, pour le moment, la capacité d'offrir aux téléspectateurs arabes autant d'informations et d'images qu'Al Jazeera, parce que la chaîne a des correspondants partout et qu'elle a les moyens de dépenser à une époque où la presse est en train de faire des économies. De plus, Al Jazeera dispose d'une crédibilité que n'ont pas les autres télévisions arabes. Ils n'ont pas encore fait de graves erreurs d'information. Donc, après cet événement qui s'ensuit, nous avons constaté aussi qu'il y a eu un dialogue, un équilibre dans la région médiatiquement, et nous demandons qu'un dialogue soit expressément suivi de ces pays qui ont décrété cet embargo, et nous condamnons donc, nous réclamons le respect de la liberté de la presse et exprimons notre profond soutien à Al Jazeera, à la chaîne de télévision qui est menacée de fermeture. J'aimerais rappeler aussi quelques chiffres dans le monde, ce que représente Al Jazeera. Notamment, Al Jazeera English, en anglais, touche plus de 120 millions de foyers actuellement. Et aujourd'hui, Al Jazeera arabique touche plus de 40 millions de foyers. Et Al Jazeera Balkan touche plus de 7,5 millions de foyers. Al Jazeera est présente dans toutes les régions du globe et aujourd'hui est un média indispensable avec lequel il faut contribuer et continuer. Donc nous réclamons la presse, la liberté de presse pour Al Jazeera. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Monsieur de Myrtas. And now I will ask you, Mr. Gilles Trendley, to take the floor, please.
Ok, je parle en anglais.
Ou en français, si vous voulez. You choose.
So, thank you for coming. Maybe just to give you a little bit of background about Al Jazeera. So, Al Jazeera Arabic was the first channel. It was started in 1996. And since then, it's been carrying on its journalistic mission, so for over 20 years. Al Jazeera English, for which I'm the managing director, started in 2006, so we've been going for just over 10 years. There's also other channels. There's Al Jazeera Mubasha, which is a live channel, which often features live conferences and live news events. There's Al Jazeera Documentary, which is a 24/7 documentary channel in Arabic. There's Al Jazeera Balkans, which is based in Sarajevo. Then you have AJ Plus, which is a digital channel, and mainly on Facebook and other digital platforms. So those are the main channels of the network. There are other elements of the network. We have a training center, a human rights center, but those are the main news channels. I'll open up for questions in a minute, but I just wanted to say it's been an extraordinary month or 6 weeks, however, whenever everything started. I believe that the original attack on the Qatar news agency, which was the sort of event that set everything off, I call it the Archduke Ferdinand moment. It was the event that at which point unfolded all these alliances and events that subsequently happened. And I must say, at Al Jazeera, we have just carried on, despite the calls to shut down and the demands to shut down Al Jazeera that we heard about. All of our journalists just carried on doing their jobs. We remained focused on doing our jobs. We continued our output, and we remain committed to doing our jobs as journalists and not being put under intimidation or threat. So we stood firm by our journalism, and we stand by the quality of our journalism. And I read in the media today that there is possibly a withdrawal of the demand to close down Al Jazeera. So that's interesting. Maybe we can go into more of that. But I just want to say we have stood firm. We believe in our journalism. We believe in it deeply, and we wouldn't do it if we didn't. And we launched a campaign, and maybe some of you saw it, to demand press freedom. So demands were being made to shut down Al Jazeera. Well, we thought, well, let's make a demand ourselves. We demand on behalf of all journalists that the journalists be allowed to do their job without threat or intimidation. As Mr. Abdullah Najjar has said, we have had a tough experience over the last 20 years that Al Jazeera has been in existence. We've had journalists detained, arrested, imprisoned, harassed, and even killed, possibly even targeted and killed. So we've had a very tough experience, but throughout that time we have remained committed to our journalism. And Al Jazeera plays a very important role, not just internationally, but in the Middle East specifically. And I'm talking here about specifically the Al Jazeera Arabic channel, which has, through its journalism, been a voice of openness and has contributed to open debate covering all sides of all stories. And it's something that we do at Al Jazeera English as well. So that's really what I wanted to say. I'm very happy to open up to any questions. We've had a lot of interviews over the last few weeks, and a lot of questions of all sorts have been thrown at us. So whatever you have to ask, we're very happy to try and answer it.
Thank you, Mr. Chandler. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the floor is yours. La parole est à vous. Si vous souhaitez poser des questions, je vous demande de bien vouloir peut-être vous présenter. Merci. En anglais ou en français, bien entendu. Alors, si personne ne pose de questions, oui, Ahmed, vas-y.
I'm Ahmed Shawia, UN journalist. Permit me just to represent the other side of the cries, or the other voice, to have more, to understand better your point of view. There is many points that the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Emirati one, yesterday published in his letter to the High Commissioner of Human Rights, talking about the composition of broadcasting by Al Jazeera, especially the Arabic one. And I think we need to have a comment on this composition regarding the extremism and other, and opening the door of Al Jazeera to make interviews with the people considered by the whole world as extremists. Thank you.
So I think you're referring to, yes, to Mr. Gargash and his comments yesterday. I think he made 3 points that Al Jazeera, if I'm correct, let's see, he said it incites violence, promotes sectarianism and anti-Semitism. Is that what you're referring to? So incitement, let's talk about incitement. We are journalists. We don't incite, we report. I can give a, this is not something new that we have been accused of. I remember back in the second Intifada, the year 2000, I don't know if you remember the death of a young boy called Mohammed al-Dura. He was a young Palestinian boy. It was the second Intifada. He was shielding behind a concrete barrier with his father, and he was shot dead. And obviously it was caught on camera, and Al Jazeera reported it. And Al Jazeera, even then, at that time, was accused of inciting anger and inciting more of the violence. We are reporting. We are not inciting. Our jobs is to report what is going on in the region. Now, the accusation of incitement is something which I think is unfair. It's unjustified. I think there's politics behind it. but our job is not to incite but to report. The same accusations were made against Al-Jazeera during the so-called Arab Spring. We were covering the protests, we were on the streets with the demonstrators, we were the voice of the man and the woman in the street. We were hearing from a new generation of people. We were hearing about their hopes and their aspirations and their dreams for change. Obviously, in the Middle East, there has been a lot of autocratic governments, and some of which fell during the 2011 period. Al Jazeera was reporting from the streets, was reporting what we would call the voice of the voiceless. We weren't inciting the demonstrations. They were happening anyway. We were there and we were reporting it. In terms of sectarianism, again, Al Jazeera is just reporting what's going on. I think I visited Iraq before the 2003 invasion, and I visited Iraq after. And I would say that the real cause of sectarianism was the political and military events going on, i.e. the invasion. It wasn't Al Jazeera's reporting. Again, don't shoot the messenger. We are doing the reporting. We are not behind these events. In terms of the accusation about anti-Semitism, I'm sure many of you may know that Al Jazeera Arabic, when it launched, it was the first channel in the region to allow and to host Israeli spokespeople speaking Hebrew on the channel. The first channel in the region to have live interviews with Israeli spokespeople. I hardly think that's anti-Semitism. In fact, in 2007, I believe it was, Mr. Shimon Peres, the former Prime Minister, visited Qatar and visited Al Jazeera. So I think these accusations that you mentioned are just that. We hear a lot of these accusations. They're meant to slur and taint the reputation and the credibility of Al Jazeera, and we reject them.
Thank you. Another question? Yeah, Bob.
Robert James Parsons, independent journalist. With regard to the lifting of the request that Al Jazeera be shut down, simply that this was set as a condition imposed upon Qatar suggests a mindset, a mentality, if you will, that entitles us to believe that it could happen again. I mean, have you been thinking along these lines at all? In other words, this might be just a respite and not a resolution of the difficulty.
Are you asking that the call to shut down might happen again?
So why not? That's it. Remember, given the source of the call, what is to stop them from doing it again? And how do you see this then, or will this perhaps provide you with lessons to fortify you in the future?
I think we've learnt a great lesson, and that's just sticking by your integrity, by your credibility, by what you do. It's what we've done in this instance, and if anybody wants to try it again, whoever it may be, we will stand firm and have the same response. We stand by the quality of our journalism, and we stand by the need for media freedom, and we will remain committed to that, even if there is another call.
Yes, please.
Finnish journalist.
Mike.
Sorry.
Here we go. So, question from the Finnish media. How do you see in bigger frames the resolution or the boycott of Qatar? How do you see that one should be dealing with it? Should one leave it to the Arab countries to deal with it, or should the international community intervene? What is your proposal for the resolution of the conflict? Thank you.
Excuse me, at the risk of evading the question, I will leave that to the politicians. I will speak about the media and about Al Jazeera, but all I would say is that I know Mr. Tillerson has been in the region. I believe the British Foreign Secretary visited. I understand the French Foreign Minister will be visiting. I think all of them seem to be visiting and in liaison with the Kuwaiti mediation that's going on. So that's all we see. We just see what everybody else is seeing. There does seem to be, well, there's clearly international interest in resolving this crisis. It's a very strategic region with very strategic partners all around. And everybody's wanting it to be resolved as quickly as possible. But how it will be resolved, I will have to leave that to the politicians.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Abbas Arwa, I'm director of the Cordoba Foundation for Conflict Resolution here in Geneva. I remember in 2010 we organized a workshop in partnership with Al-Jazeera in Doha on peace journalism. And the reason is that in the Arab world we have a very high density of conflicts, but very little resources to manage them peacefully. I just refer to your Center for Human Rights, which was launched after the Guantanamo, big crisis. Isn't it time for Al Jazeera now to invest in a similar center for conflict transformation, just to be a tool to educate people in the Arab world to deal peacefully with conflicts and not to recourse to the kind of methods that we have witnessed a few weeks ago? Thank you.
Yeah, very good question, very good suggestion. Just to backtrack, the Human Rights Department that you mentioned was launched at Al Jazeera. It's headed by Mr. Sami al-Hajj, who was imprisoned in Guantanamo Bay for about 6 years, 6.5 years. And again, I was mentioning about Al Jazeera having had a tough experience over the years. He was somebody who was picked up, I believe it was in Pakistan, and he was transferred to Guantanamo Bay, no charges. And 6 years on, he was ultimately released, no charges ever given again. That's 6 years of his life gone in Guantanamo, no charges ever made. So he runs the Human Rights Department. In terms of peace journalism, yes, I mean, you're right. Obviously, the Middle East is a region, unfortunately, heavy with conflict. But we do, as much as we have to report the conflict, we do report the efforts at peace, towards peace, all the peace talks that take place. It's very important that we send our top diplomatic correspondents to these events, whether they're in Geneva, Astana, or wherever they are. We have representation offices at the United Nations in New York, and we actively follow and report all the efforts at mediation in order to resolve these conflicts. But yes, I take on board your suggestion, and it's something we can consider.
Another question? Yes, Simon?
Simon Petit, newspaper Le Temps. Has the blockade have any impact on your daily work in Al Jazeera?
No, in short, no. We have carried on. Our screens, whether it's the broadcast or the digital platforms, it's the same journalism. We are doing our jobs. The first few days, even the first few days, which were the most uncertain, we were very clear that we were carrying on. I was asked in interviews what's happening. I was asked the same question, and it was always the same. We remain committed to what we're doing. And if you could only have seen the newsroom on the first few days, it was just the same scene. It was journalists sitting at their desks, doing their work, creating the news and putting out the news. And it was a sort of business as usual, although it was an unusual situation in the sense that Al Jazeera was at the center in some ways of the story. You know, as journalists, we don't necessarily like to put ourselves at the center of the stories. We want to report on other things, but we found ourselves, through no fault of our own, being put at the center of the story through one of the 13 demands. But despite that, we carried on. We had to find a balance between reporting the story and reporting on ourselves, which is always a challenge journalistically. You don't want to be accused of gazing at your own navel, as they say, you know, at looking too introspectively, because it's an international crisis. So it was a fine balance between reporting on the story and reporting on ourselves. Personally, I think we got it right. We didn't overdo it on ourselves, but we recognized that because of the demands made, that Al Jazeera was an integral part of the story. But no, it was jobs being done. To use the expression, it was keep calm and carry on, and that's what we did, and we just carried on with our journalism.
Yes.
Annegret Matri, I'm a Swiss journalist. What do you think is the political reason behind these 13 how you say
demands?
Yeah.
Well, let me again. I'll leave the 12 other demands to the politicians, but let me talk about the demand about Al Jazeera. In its 20-year history, there have been many occasions when there have been demands to close Al Jazeera. We have had our offices closed in many parts of the world, particularly in the Middle East, over those 20 years. So maybe the scale or the sheer audacity of this demand was different, but there have been demands in the past. There have been many reasons why in the past there have been calls to shut down Al Jazeera from specific governments. But to summarize, I would say that some of the roots of this call go back to 2011, to the so-called Arab Spring. And as I said, Al Jazeera at that time was reporting from the streets, from the Arab streets, reporting those voices in the streets that were calling for change in the region. Al Jazeera wasn't afraid to give voice and give to report on those voices that were calling for change. As I said before, you had a new generation of hopes and dreams and aspirations for change. You'll remember that time in the Middle East in 2011. It was very heady times when people really believed there was true change was going to come. And Al Jazeera was reporting that. Now there are some countries that that felt intimidated or didn't appreciate what was happening in the Middle East. And I think in a way this is some of the old guard trying to settle accounts and trying to find a reason and a justification and a time to call for the closing of Al Jazeera, because we give the voice to many different perspectives. There are governments in the Middle East that only want their people and to hear one particular narrative, one particular perspective.
Yeah.
Could you please be a bit more concrete? I mean, 2011, are you speaking about, for instance, Egypt or Bahrain? And Egypt, and now we have this military president. The revolution didn't work, or because you speak very, I mean, you are a journalist, so you have a political analysis of what is happening, and I really would like to have here also some political answer, not only facade.
Okay, I'm not a politician, but I will try.
Yeah.
So yes, during the 2011, so-called Arab Spring, I call it the so-called Arab Spring because, as you rightly said, although there was a lot of protest and revolution, in some cases nothing has come of it, or disorder has come from it. I think Tunisia is an example of something, of a country that has gone through a sort of successful transition. But yes, Egypt was one of those countries that there was a revolution. The president of the time was stepped down, and there was political change brought in. Bahrain, there were protests in Bahrain. Obviously Tunisia, in Yemen, in Syria, in Libya. I mean, and there were protests even in other countries, smaller protests. But those are the main countries that I'm referring to when I say the so-called Arab Spring.
Oui, Rachid Mesli, directeur juridique de la Fondation El-Karam à Genève, qui travaille sur les violations des droits de l'homme, en particulier avec les mécanismes des Nations Unies. Je voudrais d'abord, comme vous le savez, certains pays, comme les Émirats en particulier, ont pris des lois répressives qui punissent de lourdes peines de prison toute personne qui exprime une opinion favorable en faveur d'Al-Jazeera ou de Qatar, sur les réseaux sociaux en particulier. Je sais qu'il y a eu au moins plusieurs arrestations déjà dans ces pays où de personnes qui ont sur Twitter ou sur Facebook exprimé des opinions favorables à Al-Jazeera. Je voudrais savoir si le centre d'Al-Jazeera pour les droits de l'homme a documenté des situations de violation de la liberté d'expression dans ces pays, et si éventuellement ils peuvent nous communiquer des informations qui pourraient nous permettre de saisir le rapporteur spécial sur la liberté d'opinion et d'expression des Nations Unies. Merci.
I think I got it. You were asking about the people the decree about not expressing people's support for Qatar that was made.
Express support for Al-Jazeera and for Qatar.
Yes.
Do you have information if they have been arrested?
Yes. No, we don't. We don't have any information on anybody who was. So I believe it was Saudi Arabia and possibly I think it was Bahrain and the Emirates. They put out a decree that anybody expressing support for Al-Jazeera or for Qatar during this crisis would face heavy fine and possibly even imprisonment. Personally, I heard that there was somebody, I believe it was in the Emirates, but I can't confirm that was detained. I don't know if they were subsequently released, but we don't have any concrete evidence or news if anybody was detained, arrested, or imprisoned or fined as a result of these decrees. It's also worth mentioning that the same governments requested and demanded actually that all hotel facilities should no longer show Al Jazeera as an offering in their hotel rooms. Again, it was sort of erased from the TV listings in those countries, and again, any hotel caught having Al Jazeera available was up potentially for a heavy fine and punishment. So these are what we heard. Again, I think these sorts of things are a sign of the lack of media freedom and the lack of the appreciation of media freedom in some parts of the region.
Perhaps also Mr. Demirtas could take a part, but either of you, because, sorry, I'm still keep continuing with the sort of political question. How do you see the impact of President Trump coming into the picture and his talks about the Iran? How did it impact and influence this crisis to grow up?
Shall me first and after? Okay. So the crisis seemed to arise a few days after the visit of Mr. Trump to Riyadh. Obviously there were the public statements, but we don't know what was said behind closed doors. I know we saw Mr. Trump meet the Emir of Qatar, and he said publicly that Mr. Trump said publicly, "I look forward to selling you lots of beautiful weapons," and those were the terms. Those were the words of Mr. Trump. And then a few days later, Qatar is accused of sponsoring and terrorism. Meanwhile, you have 10,000 American troops in Qatar. I'm not sure if Mr. Trump was aware of that at the time. But there's the largest military base in Qatar, and the US leads its war against ISIL. From its planes take off from Qatar. So this all seemed to happen a few days after the visit of Mr. Trump. I think more generally, what's happening in America, and when we sort of compare ourselves here with what's happening with Al Jazeera, we notice what's happening in the US with Mr. Trump saying the media are the enemy of the people. More recently, there have been some very vicious tweets from the president against the hosts of MSNBC, vicious, misogynistic, and the same against CNN. Attacks against CNN, and Mr. Trump tweeting himself body slamming somebody to the ground with the logo of the CNN. This went publicly. I mean, I would call that incitement to violence against the media. I think it's very dangerous, but there you go. So we, as Al Jazeera, we are just as media organizations have stood by us and supported us. We stand by other media organizations under such threat and intimidation. And we were supported when we had journalists arrested for 400 days in Egypt in 2013. We got a lot of support again back then from fellow media organizations. In fact, CNN did a report for Al Jazeera. Couldn't report in Cairo. CNN did a report for us. So there was great media cooperation. We launched an international campaign, Free Al Jazeera Staff, which I don't know if any of you saw it. Journalists all around the world, they put sort of black tape over their mouths as a sign of protest and a sign of support for our 3 journalists who were again imprisoned without any evidence. I mean, what was presented in the court was absurd. There was no evidence at all, and they were subsequently released after 400 days in prison. So we believe that it's very important to stand united in solidarity with media organizations that are under attack, and that's why we launched our campaign to demand press freedom, because it wasn't just about ourselves, but it was for all journalists.
Thank you. Yes.
Boris Engelson, a local freelancer. I'm sorry I came 15 minutes late, so maybe this was explained before. I'm not sure what is the formal legal status of Al Jazeera. Is it a corporation, a foundation, etc.? And could a change in that form make it more immune to outside pressure? That's my first question. The second one is, have you made research on the reaction of public opinion in your different audience countries when you report inconvenient truths? Because in some cases, when the government is exposed, it creates a rift between the public opinion and the government, and it might bring the downfall of the government. But in some other context, even when the public know that the exposed facts are true, it brings the public opinion with the government, like in Turkey, and the public opinion points at the media as, let's say, creating havoc. So how do you analyze these 2 different contexts, and have you made research to know better your audience and the psychology of your audience when you expose true facts?
So the first part of your question, Al Jazeera is a media organization. It's funded by the state of Qatar, but it maintains editorial independence, and that's the key. There is no interference or intervention. We are free journalists.
When I said immune, it was not vis-à-vis the owner, it was vis-à-vis pressure, like the pressure on Qatar. If it were some kind of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation headquartered in Singapore, it would not be that easy for Saudi Arabia to ask the Qatar government to close it down.
Well, I don't think it's easy to close it down. As we've seen, the demand was made, and it's not been easy. We've carried on doing our jobs, and as we saw from the report earlier, that there is now a backtrack to request that it, maybe not close it down, maybe change some organizational structuring, which again we reject any outside external intervention in our in the media organization. But it's a media organization. I would compare it in some ways to the BBC, for example. Now the BBC don't like this comparison, but the BBC is funded by the license fee. The license fee is not optional, so it's a form of government tax. So the board of trustees of the BBC are appointed by the Queen and by the Prime Minister and her cabinet. So in the same way, I think there are comparisons there. Again, the BBC, there is no editorial interference from the government. That's how we would categorize Al Jazeera. We are free to report the world frankly and fairly. In fact, often we do turn a critical eye to Qatar itself. We have interviewed Qatari officials, and we've asked them very tough questions. We have interviewed the foreign minister a number of times in the past, different foreign ministers, asking them very tough questions. In fact, I would use the word grill. We've grilled them. We've interviewed the head of the World Cup 2022, and we've asked him about allegations of corruption, allegations of bribery, allegations of the mistreatment of labourers. We are very sure about ourselves in asking the questions, and we don't shy away from asking tough questions just because whoever it may be. We deal with all countries in the same way. So that's the first part of your question. Secondly, in terms of how our audience have responded, I think it's still a little early into the crisis to
not responded just to this crisis, but in general, since you report often inconvenient truths, to use the standard vocabulary, and the public opinion does not always react in the way we would hope here in Europe, the way the public opinion reacts in situations, undemocratic moves in, let's say, Pakistan or in Turkey is not what human rights advocates expect and
we're not looking to influence public opinion. We're simply reporting what we think are as you said, the truth, and we're looking to report professionally, objectively, frankly, freely, fairly, and that's what we do. Now, what happens thereafter is not something that we spend too much time thinking about. Otherwise, you can't think how by exposing this truth, how it's going to affect public opinion. Our jobs is to expose the truth, question authority, question people in power, and to report as frankly and fairly as we can.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Hi. Il faut que tu t'approches alors. So we'll take another question. Et voilà. Ça va? Tu arrives? D'accord. Okay.
Ok, le tête est ouvert, merci. Ok. I'm trying to see you.
Okay,
oh, here you are. Thank you, dear. Well, I'm sorry, as I came late, maybe
okay.
You've been tackled the question before, but let me just introduce myself. I've been covering the Middle East affairs since almost half a century, from Yemen to Iran. And I would like to know how many offices of Al-Jazeera are still working more or less freely, and which ones are the ones which are more threatened than the others.
Okay. So recently, after the current or during the current crisis, we had our offices in Saudi Arabia closed, and we had our office in Jordan closed. Obviously, we condemn these measures. We think they are unjustified. We made a call that all journalists be allowed to do their jobs freely. We made a call that all governments allow journalists to do their jobs. Over the years, there have been times when offices in the Middle East that you're referring to have been closed. Sometimes they are reopened. In Egypt, our office was closed about 3 or 4 years ago. It was actually trashed as well. I mean, we had equipment burnt, and it was sort of looted. So we haven't had a presence in Egypt for a number of years now. There are some countries where we simply don't have offices. Some countries such as Algeria, we don't have an office there. We don't have an office in the Emirats or Bahreïn. We don't get access to Bahrain. We wanted to go to Bahrain some months ago to cover one of the meetings of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council. This is going back some months before the crisis, and we were refused entry. So there are some countries which simply we either don't have an office or we don't have access to. All of our offices where we do have offices, we carry on our jobs as journalists. Sometimes, as the previous question came, there are inconvenient truths, and there is talk sometimes of those offices being closed. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But as I said before, the only thing we can do is just carrying on doing our jobs as journalists and reporting. And we can't always be looking over our shoulder thinking, will this report risk or jeopardize our office being closed? We have to go forward and we have to report. I think the day when we start trying to edit ourselves, and because of any fear of an office being closed, will be a sad day for journalism. So we carry on doing what we do. Offices sometimes get closed. That's sometimes one of the results.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead. You. Non, la dame qui est derrière vous. Oui. Yes. And then you. And
Merci.
Then you.
Ksenia Cherny-Scanlon, Director of Communications for the Right Livelihood Award, known as Alternative Nobel Prize here. Actually, we have a number of journalists among our laureates, and just last year we gave the award to the Turkish newspaper Cumhuriyet, and also we had laureates from Egypt and Syria last year. And for us, journalism is sort of the canary in the coal mine, which we see as the first target very often in closing overall the civil society in those countries. My question is, you're now on a trip to Geneva, and I understand you will be continuing on to London. Are there any specific requests or suggestions that you have for the wide array of organizations that are based here in Geneva, from the UN to small NGOs and foundations such as ours? Thanks.
Well, I would say that we appreciate the support that we have that has come our way in the last 6 weeks or 5 weeks from the crisis. We have had a lot of support from different organizations. For example, the United Nations Human Rights Chief said that the demand to shut Al Jazeera was totally unacceptable. We've had calls and of support from other media organizations, journalists' unions, Reporters Without Borders. All of them have come out and said, this is outrageous, it's unacceptable to demand the closure of Al Jazeera. And I must say it's very encouraging when you are in the spotlight and when you are being targeted and there is a demand from 4 neighboring countries, and you know, and when you feel threatened in that way, it is very encouraging to get public support in the way that some of these media organizations and the United Nations came out. It's just, you know, we will carry on anyway, but it's a great sense of support to feel that that is coming and that it's stated publicly, and I think that's the best thing that can be done. When, you know, journalism, as you said, is the canary in the coal mine. It's at the coalface. We're seeing more and more journalists being deliberately targeted, not just killed in crossfire, but in many cases deliberately targeted, assassinated, imprisoned, harassed. And I think it's very important that all of us speak out on behalf of the profession of journalism, and that we stand in solidarity with each other. Because if one of us goes, then it's a loss to the whole profession of journalism.
Yes, sir, and then you.
Ok, merci. Adel Mejri, représentant de COGEP international à l'ONU. Nous sommes à Genève, l'international. On a l'ONU, on a le haut commissaire des droits de l'homme, Conseil des droits de l'homme, etc. Ma première question, que ce soit Al-Jazeera ou bien le centre d'Al-Jazeera des droits et libertés, quelles sont les procédures ou bien quelles sont les démarches que vous avez faites pour défendre Al-Jazeera, pour défendre la liberté d'expression? Deuxièmement, cette initiative de conférence de presse, c'est des ONG, c'est la société civile qui a lancé cette initiative. Comme samedi passé aussi, il y avait un rassemblement à la place des Nations pour aussi défendre la liberté d'expression, défendre Al-Jazeera comme média libre. Quelles sont aussi l'opportunité de collaborer avec la société civile internationale à Genève, avec le centre d'Al-Jazeera pour les droits et les libertés? Ma troisième question, la dernière, d'après votre stratégie, quelles sont les lignes rouges qu'il ne faut pas dépasser contre cette pression de pays qui sont contre la liberté d'expression? Merci.
I think, I'll start to answer, and if I'm off track, you'll let me know. So the first question, I think, was about what the strategy that we're using to stand up for our journalism.
Surtout que vous avez aussi des journalistes qui ont démissionné après des dépressions, etc. Il y a des journalistes d'Al-Jazeera qui ne sont pas là avec Al-Jazeera, et aussi il y a des journalistes qui sont en prison, ça fait longtemps. Quelle est votre stratégie dans ce sens?
What is your strategy?
Yeah. So obviously we're here in Geneva. We are going on to London. We have some events in London where we'll be speaking at a journalist club and also at the Houses of Parliament. I think more broadly, though, we launched our campaign to demand press freedom. So these demands had been made against us. We launched a video online to demand press freedom, in which our presenters in Al Jazeera English and Al Jazeera Arabic made a series of demands about protecting the rights of journalism and the right of journalists not to be intimidated and not to be put under threat in any way, in order to allow us to do our jobs and to allow information to be shared and to allow people to have the right to information, which was under threat. In terms, the second question was about the human rights and collaboration.
Between NGO at Geneva and the center of...
Yeah, so the human rights department are very active, and they're very active with the United Nations, particularly with UNESCO. There is a memorandum of understanding between UNESCO and the Human Rights Department of Al Jazeera. At the World Press Freedom Day, which was several months ago, it was held in Jakarta in Indonesia, so held in a different country every year. Al Jazeera was present, at that event. We support the efforts of UNESCO to raise the profile of the issue of media freedom, and Al Jazeera has been very active in creating what is called the Declaration for the Protection of Journalists. It's declaration that we have written in liaison with other media organizations, and getting good support from the UNESCO, and we are trying to get this declaration presented to the Security Council, the UN Security Council, the UN General Assembly, in order to give teeth to the idea that journalists should be protected. It's really putting on the table this issue that too many protagonists and too many governments are targeting journalists. And of course journalism is a pillar of a healthy society that questions and that wants to develop. So Al Jazeera, I'm very proud as a member of Al Jazeera that the organization I work with presented and developed this, what we call the Declaration for the Protection of Journalists. It's a little booklet which is designed to be presented at the UN General Assembly, and I know the human rights are working closely with the people at UNESCO and other media organizations to present that. The third question was about red lines.
Yes.
What are the red lines in terms of? I think it's much as I've mentioned before. We are journalists at heart. I'm not a politician. I'm a journalist, and our job is to speak and report frankly and fairly and freely. We have a lot of journalists. Many of the journalists at Al Jazeera have worked with credible international news agencies and organizations, and they wouldn't be there if there was any feeling that there was any interference or intervention of any kind. We are free to do our jobs. We report on all situations, on all countries, whatever they may be. We get all opinions. Even in this crisis, we have been seeking contributors and guests from Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and Egypt and the Emirates. We've had guests in recent days and weeks on our shows from Saudi Arabia, giving their point of view. I mean, we that's what our job is, to get all sides of the story. And again, I said we find ourselves at the middle of the story, but it's very important for us that we get all sides of this story. So that includes the contributors from some of those countries. Now, it is difficult to get contributors from some of those countries because they don't want to, they refuse to appear on Al Jazeera. So we have to go out of our way to get some guests, and we really do try. And just last week we had a great show, a half-hour debate show, and one of the guests was from Saudi. One of the guests was from Qatar. One of the guests was from Saudi. It was, it was a good debate. And that's what we are about getting all sides to the story. So in terms of the red line, that's what we will continue to do. And if there's a red line that trying to stop us to do that, then we can't accept that.
Yes, sir.
Ouais, je vais parler en français. Je demande à Lusa, avec mes remerciements, de faire la traduction. Ouais, ce serait... Gilles comprend aussi en arabe, c'est très bien. Juste en fait, on sait très bien que, bon, je me présente, Rida Ajmi, je suis le président du Centre de Genève pour la démocratie et les droits de l'homme qui organise cette conférence avec Al Jazeera. Nous savons très bien que la liberté de la presse n'est pas connue ni reconnue par les États qui font l'embargo sur Qatar. Donc, ils n'ont même pas des autorités qui peuvent légiférer ce droit, ils n'ont pas même des parlements. C'est connu. Donc, qu'ils veulent fermer Al Jazeera, on peut comprendre. Donc, ils sont gênés par cette liberté et ils sont gênés par la parole libre. Mais ce qu'on ne peut pas, on n'est pas en train de dire, mais clairement que M. Trump était au courant de cette demande de fermeture d'Al Jazeera au moins 3 jours avant qu'il débarque à Riyad. C'était donc M. Mohamed bin Zayed qui était à Washington, il a présenté les 13 points, les 13 conditions qui étaient discutées avec les autorités américaines, et je nomme donc l'institution, donc la présidence même américaine. On sait très bien les problèmes de M. Trump avec la presse en général, on sait très bien aussi donc sa position de CNN et autres. Et parmi les demandes, il n'y a pas que donc la fermeture de la chaîne Al-Jazeera, mais aussi la fermeture de plusieurs autres sites Internet, par exemple Al-Arabi Al-Jadid et Al-Arabi 21 et ainsi de suite. Donc c'était bien mentionné parmi avec Al-Jazeera et autres sites Internet et autres aussi chaînes qui dérangent. Alors, pourquoi parler de ces pays qui font l'embargo, mais ne pas parler de l'origine même du problème, à savoir que M. Trump, qui est dérangé par la presse, il ne peut pas, c'est clair et net, donc fermer CNN en Amérique pour des raisons évidentes. La liberté de la presse, elle est ancrée dans la loi et dans aussi la mentalité américaine. Mais donc, il veut aussi fermer lui-même Al-Jazeera. Ça le dérange. Parce qu'elle est aussi exigeante et aussi un média international qui a une certaine influence en Amérique comme ailleurs. Alors, pourquoi parler de l'embargo et des pays de la région qui veulent fermer Al Jazeera et vous ne parlez pas souvent ou assez de l'origine du problème qui est M. Trump, qui veut aussi se débarrasser d'Al Jazeera.
I think I might need some help there.
To make the story short, why don't you speak more about the fact that Mr. Trump wants to close also Al Jazeera in the United States? That's and other sites and other websites. Why don't you focus more on that?
That Mr. Trump wants to close Al Jazeera. I haven't heard that, but
il était au courant des 13 points. Il s'était discuté avec les autorités américaines.
Before coming to the region, so.
Well, I don't know the behind the scenes of the politics, but the demands came from the 4 countries, Saudi, Egypt, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. Mr. Tillerson, the Secretary of State of Mr. Trump, is in the region now, visiting the different sides. I believe he called the position of Qatar reasonable. He used those words. I don't know what we're all waiting to see what comes out of this trip. But I think Mr. Trump is focusing on issues at home. Maybe he sent his Secretary of State, but I think he's focusing on issues at home that he has with his own media, it seems.
Bob?
My question requires a few words of introduction by your leave. In the United States, Northwestern University is generally ranked as one of the top private universities on par with the Ivy League. Its School of Journalism, Medill School of Journalism, is ranked indisputably as the best in the United States and Canada, and probably the best in the world. And they have, for training their investigative journalists, they have what is called the Innocence Project, where a person adopts a prisoner who has been condemned to death and investigates the whole thing and to see what the real case is, because it's always the case where a prisoner is claiming that he's innocent. Almost virtually every one of them has been cleared afterwards. Under the George Walker Bush administration, the school was attacked and threatened with closure. Its directors and staff were threatened with criminal prosecution for interfering with the course of justice. Now, as you know, Medill runs the School of Journalism in Doha. It is Medill in Doha. It is unique. It's the only such school in the whole Arabic Muslim world, and it's one of the best. It's one of the best outside the Western countries. They have been subject to all sorts of pressure, not from the Qatari government, but from other countries whose students have gone to the School of Journalism and been exposed to things their governments didn't approve of. The school works closely with Al Jazeera. I have 4 of their interns here. They were literally among the best I've ever had. And it's impossible that this has not affected the Medill in Doha and could you say something about this? Because, again, it's a very special case, the Medill School of Journalism at the National University.
So we have very good relations with the Northwest University in Qatar, and we also take some of their interns. In fact, some of their graduates come on and work with us. They're excellent. I mean, they are really excellent, and we have a very good relationship with them, and we want to continue that relationship. The journalists that we see are always very sharp. They come from all over the world, both Qatar and the region and internationally. And all I can say is that we will continue to build our relationship with them.
What have you heard, though, about this? Has there been any rumors, noise?
I haven't heard anything.
Rumors behind the scene about the School of Journalism also?
Personally, I haven't heard anything specific to the School of Journalism that you're asking about.
Ahmed?
If I can go a little in depth with my question, as a journalist and as a professional, do you think when we give a space on the screen for somebody like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, for example, the head of ISIS, or like al-Julani, the head of Jabhat al-Nusra, as happened already in Ahmad Mansour program in Al-Jazeera, do you think this is the real journalism, to give the space for distributing ideas already accused by the whole world, and there is Security Council resolution classified a kind of organization as a terrorist groups? Thank you.
It's a good question, and it's a sort of philosophical question as well. I think, I think our view is that we have to cover what's happening in the world, and that might mean interviewing some people who are with one group or another. I remember that Al-Jazeera is well known for being a channel that featured interviews with Osama bin Laden. The tapes would be thrown at our doorstep, the doorstep of our office in Kabul, and what always happened is that Al Jazeera never ran the interview in full. It ran sections of the interview, and it always gave context and always had analysts to provide context. It wasn't simply that the channel became a mouthpiece for Osama bin Laden. It always presented analysts who could give more context and be more critical of what was being said. Al Jazeera is not the only channel that featured interviews with Osama bin Laden. Other channels, American channels, have done the same, and many times they scooped Al Jazeera in getting these interviews. I think as long as the interviews, are rigorous and critical, then we need to hear some of these groups. I remember well in the I believe it was in the 80s in Britain, there was the government tried to ban the BBC from hearing the Irish Republican Army, the IRA. And the BBC got around that by dubbing actors' voices over the interviews with the Irish Republican Army representatives. It's something that is always coming up. Where does journalism draw the line? But I think we have to be fair, and we have to report and hear the views of people that will help us understand the story, but that doesn't mean we give them a free platform. We have to be very critical, and with certain people we have to be very careful how those interviews are handled.
Thank you. This was the last question, so we will give some time to one-to-one interviews. I know that there are some requests. I would like to thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here with us. I would like to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your presence here, and I invite you to have a coffee and some refreshment. Thank you very much.